Hey everyone, welcome back to another AskGN episode. We have 3 we're shooting today, probably. One of them will be the Patreon AskGN. It'll be up on the Patreon channel, so you go to patreon.com/GamersNexus to get access to that one if you want it. But for this one, we're on episode 100 now, and for that, we are doing nothing special. And if you have questions, as always, leave them in the comments section below so that we can look at them for next time. We'll be talking about GPUs today. So end of life for Pascal, is it here or not yet? And a couple of other excellent questions from you all. And we also have some art that we'll be talking about. Before that, this video is brought to you by the EVGA CLC280 liquid cooler. People ask me how I keep cool during the summer with all this hair. Well, I've tried a lot of different products, and few do exactly what I need. Many of them cause tangles or worse. EVGA CLC280 helps keep my core temperatures low during hot benchmarking sessions. The CLC280 is price competitive and focuses on performance for value, offering a 280 liquid cooler at an affordable price. Get yours at the link in the description below. Hair mounting kit sold separately. So for the art, we talked in the news video about wanting to put up some art on the walls, mostly old hardware from a lot of you have sent old CPUs, stuff like that. Really looking forward to getting those in. So we're putting that up in frames on the wall, stuff like that. I think we'll also frame this. This is an old dead AM3 motherboard that we've had for a long time, and we did some thermal paste experiments on the socket, and I think we're just gonna frame it and explain how it's abstract art. I don't know. Man walking down alleyway. Sounds like a good title for that one. If you have stuff you want to send us, though, for consideration, we have a P.O. box now. I'll include it in the description below. You can send stuff there. If you want to email us and ask if we already have whatever you're thinking of sending, feel free to do that. But yeah, so looking forward to seeing what you have. Maybe we can frame it. No guarantee it'll be on video, but we do need some art for the office, and old hardware makes a lot of sense. Also, by the way, store.gamersnexus.net to get on the back order list for the mod mats. They're on the way in for the next round. So, all right, first question is from Berge, who says, I enjoy AskGN because it contains answers to difficult questions and questions that I didn't know I even wanted to ask. Sure, one could Google this stuff, but that doesn't help when I don't even know I have a question. I included this because last week we had a guy asking about why we don't have questions that you can't just Google the answer to, even though Google has pretty much everything, access to everything that I would know anyway. But this is actually a really good point, and not one I thought of, which is that these videos, I guess, help you figure out what you even want to ask. So thank you to everyone who has posted questions that benefit the community. Please continue to do so in the comments below. First real question here is from Grizzly Bear, who says, following up from a recent video, is Pascal already end of life? I haven't found any info on that. Seeing the price of a 2080 Ti, I think it's wise to save up for buying a GPU next, or if 1080 Ti's won't be available anymore, say in 2 months. So yeah, this is a great question, and one that always comes up when there's a new launch of a product. Is it end of life? There's no firm official information from Nvidia yet. I'll just put that out there first. Nvidia has not officially, in any of its investor meetings, as far as I'm aware, said we are killing production of whatever part. So no official information. But I was able to talk to a few people, and I have, of course, my own thoughts as well on this. And the thing with Pascal is there's a lot of it out there because Nvidia overbought for mining and ended up with a whole lot of inventory that's been getting dumped on the board partners, and board partners have to get rid of it. So that's why you're seeing like 1080 Ti's and 1080s at a lower price than is typical. And that's not gonna last forever. So if you've been in the industry a while, you've seen CPU prices, GPU prices tend to actually go up as a product goes EOL. And I don't know exactly why that is. It's because you can't get it anymore, I guess. And I don't know if maybe business users are think that you have to buy exactly the same part when the old one dies. I don't know, but typically the prices go up, not down. Right now they are down because there's so much oversupply of Pascal. That will not last forever. So as far as is it EOL, we asked around, and as we understand right now, Pascal is sort of on hold. Nvidia still has the capability to produce more if they wanted to. It's not officially EOL, but as I understand it from our contacts in the industry in the AIB side, Nvidia is not presently making more Pascal GPUs because they made too many anyway. So it's not dead yet. The 1060 and up are especially oversupplied right now. So there's a lot of 1060, 70, 80, and 80 Ti. And the 2060 and 2050 launch aren't happening today. It's just the 2080 and the Ti right now, which those will influence which parts go EOL as well. The lower end Pascal parts will keep being made, well, assuming they sell through them, until those parts launch. It's the 1080 Ti that'll go away first, and we're not sure on when the 1080 and 1070 will go away, but definitely the 1080 Ti is one of the first to go end of life. And that is probably going to happen around Q4. Potentially inventory might dwindle in October, and that's just based on the current supply and the current high demand, because the response to RTX pricing from the community was so severe that our prediction and the prediction of our contacts is that Pascal will remain a good seller up until the point that RTX potentially becomes more affordable or has benchmarks to support the price that it is asking. So you'll see a lot of Pascal sales up through October, and then at that point, supply will dwindle, and we're not sure how much will be left. But Q4, it looks like EOL for the Ti most likely. And then for the 1080 and 1070, we're not clear. Those will take a bit longer to clear out and get rid of. So those might be around a little while longer than the Ti's. 1060 and down, no idea, because there's no RTX replacement yet. And that's, by the way, another thing we were looking at is, will the RTX branding be removed from the lower end cards? Because it's not, a 2060 will almost certainly not have the horsepower required to do ray tracing the way that a 2070 8080 Ti can do. So will they revert to GTX branding because it won't have that capability? I mean, it might have the capability in terms of tensor cores, but will it have the necessary horsepower to drive graphics at a reasonable resolution and still ray trace? So that impacts branding. I'm presently one of my theories is that we might see some Pascal refreshes at the very low end, like a 2050 Ti, 2060, something like that. Because if those are still perfectly good parts and they still have a lot of them, margins high, easy to make, then I don't know, there's no reason that Nvidia might not consider taking a 1070 Ti or something, or 1080, and turning it into a 2060. But anyway, as far as the answer to your question, it's not EOL yet. Pascal 1080 Ti's will die first, and that'll probably be October to Q4 when you start seeing prices go the other direction potentially as supply dwindles, and then 1080s will be a bit later because there's more of them in the channel. Next one, Fuddy Duddy says, with NVIDIA's RTX series focusing mostly on the new tensor-driven technologies, will that mean reviewers will have to approach reviews differently? I can understand that an apples-to-apples comparison would still be prudent, so rasterization only, no tensor features, but if these tensor cores can unburden the cudacores with features like DLSS and thus improve frame rate versus, say, a 4-tap MSAA setup on a regular GPU, would that be fair given the caveats at the start of the video, which referring to last week's video, I think. So yeah, it's going to change a bit the type of tests we do, but I can't speak for other reviewers. I can tell you what we're going to do. For RTX, we are definitely still doing rasterization normal benchmarks, because all the games we test, most games on the market today, are still without any ray tracing features at all. So we'll still be testing those. It's really important because it gives you a firm answer to how well does it perform versus Pascal, Kepler, Maxwell in a normal game, which would be in most of your library today. So when a new card comes out, it's not like you only play games that card is built to work with. And we're going to be testing the old games and the new games as they come out. Those are a bit scarce right now, but we'll test them as soon as, I think, Tomb Raider comes out next week. Assetto Corsa comes out next week, and those are supposed to have RTX features. So we will be testing those. It's just a question of how does it perform versus normal cards under normal circumstances. And one of the tests we'll be doing, certainly, whether or not it's in the review, I can't tell you right now, but will be just the new games with RTX features disabled and test them sort of just as a normal game. So we'll test them without any of the special NVIDIA features on Pascal and on Turing, and then we'll test, and probably Volta, and then we'll test them with those features, RTX features, on the same suite of cards. And what does the scaling look like? How does it handle on Pascal? Is there a visual gain? That's another thing we have to look at. So this is where, to your methodology question, it gets kind of tricky. In days past, there was a time when reviewers, before I started reviewing GPUs, had to take comparison shots of the games they were working on, because the different cards would render the games in such a different way that you had different visual quality differences, even though the frame rate still seems like a fixed number you can measure and the settings might look the same. The way the cards were interpreting the settings was different between brands, and that causes problems because you can't quantitatively measure that. You have to do a comparison. So we'll be doing comparisons of RTX settings on versus off on multiple generations, at least 2, so that we can see what is the visual benefit. Even if we know that RTX processes the RTX features, the ray tracing features, MLSS, MLA, all that stuff, significantly better than other cards can, okay, cool. But what value does that give us when considering that the visual quality might actually not be worth the performance hit? So that's something that we have to look into and consider as well. So yes, it does change our considerations for testing quite a bit, but we're still going to be testing cards just like normally. Thermals all be tested normally, power tested normally, and rasterization games will be tested normally. So we'll have a full picture of what's going on. Just keep in mind, some of this stuff will come out in separate feature pieces from us, so it might not all be in the initial review, depending on time restrictions of testing time available and also the video duration. But I don't know, hopefully that answers some of your question. Yeah, we'll be testing with them with the features on and off and make sure that it's all level for all the tests and see how it does. Next one, Middle Quark says, "Hi Steve, great channel with great content. Thank you. I have a kind of odd question, but I hope you can help with some clarity. Given that big power fluctuations are inevitable when running a specific application, which of these two situations is better for the longevity of a GPU specifically, or any other component in general? Voltage fluctuation with stable amperage, or amperage fluctuation with stable voltage? Let's also assume that the voltage in both cases, even when fluctuating, does not reach dangerous levels. From what I know in electronics, the voltage is the most dangerous of variables. However, my concern is that a continuous fluctuation in electrons in specific weak wires on the PCB or inside the GPU may cause more damage." So first of all, yes, voltage is definitely one of the most dangerous variables, if not the most dangerous. The thing with current, with amperage, the GPU or the CPU or RAM or whatever, it's only going to pull the current that it needs, and the voltage will be supplied to it by a voltage regulator or a power supply of some sort. And there are power supplies on graphics cards as well. So everything's pretty much got a power supply of some kind outside of just the actual PC power supply that's supplying all of the power for the computer. So current is drawn. For voltage, and fibers, by the way, can complicate this a bit because fully integrated voltage regulators like in the Intel CPUs do a bit of work as well. But anyway, for voltage, you want good power regulation and good VRMs to ensure that the supply is stable. And then you need a user who is not insane to make sure you set a voltage that is safe. So as long as you're staying within the parameters of the part and keeping the voltage relatively safe, and you have a good power supply, good voltage regulation, it'll be fine. To answer your question though of what causes more damage, it's going to be the voltage that can kill stuff, especially as you have, let's say you have a board it's got a lot of ripple, or video cards as well have ripple issues depending on the VRM. So the lower quality the VRM, lower quality the power delivery of the component, you introduce potentially more ripple. This is true for power supplies as well. You introduce variance fluctuation in the voltage supply, and if it spikes, like let's say you did it to yourself, you use LLC at too high of a level or something, and so load line calibration now, instead of dipping down when it wants to change, it's going to dip up. It's going to spike, and that can cause damage too. So you might spike in a way that could be detrimental to the CPU's longevity. You start looking at things like integrated memory controllers or IMCs, SoCs for AMD, and what kills those, it doesn't kill them, it degrades them, is high voltage, not current. So if you're pushing a higher voltage like 1.4 SA, for example, or even VSOC, something like that, 1.4, 1.3 in that range, it will degrade the quality of the IMC over time. So over time, you'll be able to support a lower frequency. You might require a higher voltage to support the same frequency, and that degradation is caused by voltage, by heat, and of course, current it correlates directly because it's just voltage times amps gives you watts. So it's all part of the same formula, but voltage is the one that you really need to be concerned about. And I mean, for the most part, even though we talk about wanting good power regulation, good VRMs on a motherboard, for the most part, any average board and up is going to be fine unless you're really doing some extreme overclocking. But there are definitely like low-end, bottom-of-the-barrel power supplies that can cause damage, and there are low-end boards that can cause damage. It just, as it kind of depends on how you abuse it as well. If you're using a low-end board and trying to push a high overclock, it's not going to end well. But yes, voltage is the thing to be most concerned about, and the current you don't have as much control over anyway. So just set the voltage in a safe manner. Next one, Merkasaw says, how does the resolution affect graphics card power usage and by extension boost clocks and temperatures? I've noticed that every card I've got and previously owned sees higher power consumption and lower boost clocks as resolution increased. My 1060, for example, hits its power limit at 1440p and doesn't at 1080p. We're talking unlocked frame rate here. And my 1080 Ti also sees higher power usage and therefore slightly reduced clocks at 1080p versus 1080p. The reason is almost certainly because you are hitting CPU-bound scenarios, potentially anyway. The 1060, bit of a question, but we haven't done this in a while, but there was a time when we were doing power tests, we'd clamp the cables, say take a current clamp, you put it on the 12-volt cables going into the video card, and you can measure the current. And so we did that for power monitoring. And I did test 1440 versus 4K, and I think even 1080 at one point, and the difference is very little. It's pretty marginal. So the only reason you start seeing big differences is, let's say we test 1080p versus 4K power consumption, and we see like a, I don't know, 20, 30 watt difference in power consumption. The reason you might see that, the reason you would see that, is not because of the GPU's workload being any less severe. It's because the GPU is not getting as much work because the CPU is bottlenecking it. So if you're at a point where the CPU is the bottleneck and so the GPU is sitting there waiting, idle, burning cycles, doing nothing, then yes, it will consume less power because it's burning cycles on nothing. And that's typically where you see the difference, not because the resolution itself is actually different in terms of how it's processed on the GPU. As long as the GPU is loaded and burdened in the same way and the CPU is not limiting it, then you should see roughly the same power consumption. It's within a couple of watts typically. And I haven't tested that in about a year, but we did test it at one point. Next one is from, so I've got one question here we're going to throw to Johnny Guru, as you all know him, once he's available, and it's about how uninterruptible power supplies impact performance of a power supply in a PC. But we don't have the answer for that yet, so we'll throw that to him when he's available. The next one, though, I need to bring in Andrew, who is on our team, and he does a lot of 3D modeling, 3D animation, rendering work. And that question is from Liquidpaper, who asks, assuming that you could ray trace render a game with no performance hit, what are the benefits of doing so relative to traditional rendering? I feel like no one, at least not Nvidia, has really explained why an end user should care about ray tracing, or at least why doing so is theoretically preferable over traditional rendering, performance hit notwithstanding. So first of all, before I bring Andrew in to discuss this with him, a couple things. Ray tracing, as Nvidia has presented it, so RTX cards, they don't just do ray tracing, they also do like a machine learning super sampling, which is upscaling the image, and a machine learning anti-aliasing. They fall under the RTX suite, but they are not ray tracing technology. So there are a few different things Nvidia does. Your global illumination is another one that can leverage the tensor cores, but don't necessarily fall under the ray tracing bucket. And we'll talk more about what the SS and AA stuff means later if you don't already know. But we can talk about ray tracing today. Okay, so the question was, we have Andrew here now. Assuming that you could ray trace render a game with no performance hit, what are the benefits of doing so relative to traditional rendering? NVIDIA's tried to explain this pretty hard, I think, with the Star Wars demo. So if you've seen the Star Wars demo, that talks about a lot of it, but I don't know, where do we start with this? Do we just...
Yeah, I don't know, because it is mostly not having to use screen space reflections. Even though that is possible, it is the cheapest way to render reflections. And I'm actually not sure the limits of RTX. Do you know if, I guess this is something we could test to see if non-screen space reflections are cheaper than RTX reflections or ray trace reflections in final games?
Yeah, don't know. And the problem is the demos were kind of incomplete in that they'd show RTX on and then everything off.
Right.
Like including the existing cheated ways to do lighting. So, and when we say things like, so Andrew used a few words there. Cheaper is in reference to resource consumption, and screen space reflections we should define as well. Is that what we're talking about? The camera has a view of us. The camera can't see our backs. If we have a mirror behind us.
Right. It's super weird if there's a mirror behind us and we're using screen space reflections. You'd actually see our faces looking at you in the mirror behind us if that's all that the camera could go based off of.
Right, and there are ways to cheat that too, I think.
Right.
But I guess ray tracing is probably the easiest way to get accuracy, but it's extremely resource intensive.
Right. If you're using it, I don't know how far we should talk into ray tracing, but you would be tracing all of the color bouncing off of all of our materials from every light source, so that way it can get all the, what's the best way to put this? Just like all the color bouncing off of us from every direction would be hitting everything around us.
Yeah, so it tends, like if, I guess an example would be, the other day there was a Coca-Cola truck parked outside of our window, and it's a giant red truck, and so the light is hitting that truck, and as it reflected off into the window of the office, it was coloring the light on the walls in the office itself a bit red.
Right. So it basically looked like we had red lights in the room, but it was just the natural sunlight hitting a red object and then turning that light red
as it comes in through the window. So is that
that'd be global illumination.
Global illumination, and that's another thing that Nvidia's been demoing with RTX. So RTX more than just RTX itself is more than just the prefix for the card. It's a package, like an SDK of all the stuff. But yeah, global illumination is one of the things where you can get that indirect, I guess, lighting. Is that what that is?
That's correct.
So you get indirect lighting off another surface, bounce, come into the room. And I don't know, I mean, can you fake that stuff now?
Well, yeah, that's the other thing, that Unreal Engine has been able to do that for a very long time, at least since the release of Unreal Engine 4.
They have tech demos showing it too.
Yeah, right.
So it's not like it's new visually, it's just new the way, well, not even new, but it's new that Nvidia is able to do this via ray tracing while maintaining real-time performance.
Right.
That's the new part. So ray tracing isn't new, and these lighting effects aren't new.
Correct.
But the real-time aspect is. So
the real-time aspect is arguably not that new either.
Right.
But the way that they're combining it all together into one thing is pretty new.
So yeah, then I guess part of the question we should address is just what's the benefit? And I think if a lot of games right now are pretty good at cheating the graphics.
Right.
And by cheating, it's not like it's a bad thing, it's just you find the way to make the graphics without killing the performance. They're so good at cheating it in that for a while anyway, I don't know that might not look all that different to you.
Yeah.
So it depends on the implementation.
Which, if you're doing true direct lighting, you will not have any, like if my hand was close to the table, the backside would be completely dark. There would be no light bouncing off the table to the other side of my hand. But you can just say, it's pretty close to something, just make it a little lighter.
Right.
And you're not actually counting light bounces at that point. You're just telling it to make it lighter because it's closer to something, which would be an example of cheating.
So you're doing like a proximity check and then just applying a different color to it or hue or something.
Yeah, something like that.
But not tracing the rays.
Right.
So, and ray tracing too, by the way, is traced backwards, so it comes from your eye back to the source.
Not in real life.
Not in real life. But in the way this technology works, it is because it's easier to see what hits the camera and then go backwards from there rather than let's trace literally everything.
Right, and then have a bunch of things go off into the distance where it's not even being picked up by the camera.
Right. Yes, so I don't know, hopefully that helps. Anything else you want to clarify on this one?
I guess if you're implying that graphics don't mean much to you, and what does ray tracing bring otherwise if it's not just a graphical improvement, then honestly it doesn't really bring anything, to be honest.
Yeah, it's a graphics thing. And if you're happy with existing graphics and you want better gameplay, it's not really gonna. It's not like ray tracing is gonna enable new mechanics,
Right.
in any meaningful way, anyway.
It's not going to change any geometry, like you said, in any way either.
Right. Geometry is not changed at all. Whatever models they made or what they made. So, hopefully that helps. Last question, and while I have you here, Andrew, is how much of your life, when your life flashes before your eyes, how much of your life do you want to not have been ray traced?
I think all of it will have been ray traced.
There you go. All of it's ray traced. Last question. So last one was from Jock McBile, who says, hey, Steve, a suggestion. How about $4 to $5 off if you buy a set of 4 GN beer glasses? I one-upped you, and we did $20 off if you buy 4, but they're out of stock because I made them $20 off if you buy 4. So anyway, they'll be restocked soon. Store.gamersnexus.net to pick up those or anything else like the mod match. Thank you, Andrew, for joining me. And you'll find more of our stuff on the channel, so subscribe for that as always. Patreon.com/GamersNexus for the bonus episode. We'll see you all next time.